I'm John Schaefer, radio host based in New York. I've been playing the music of Philip Glass on my program New Sounds for over 30 years, but he wasn't always a successful composer. This is Philip Glass, Taxi Driver.
I think that the pulse of the music is a part of the life of America. It's a rough place in some ways, but it's not short on energy or an imagination. And you see that with all kinds of people. When I was driving, my driving days, and I was picking up people at the Port Authority bus stations, you'd see young people coming in every hour. You'd see them coming, pouring into New York, coming here to make a career, to make a life. They weren't all artists. They could have been people going into business or people wanting to open factories or open design studios or whatever. But people who are leaving relatively comfortable places for the intensity and excitement of a city like New York. And that's what they found.
New York in the 70s was on the brink of financial collapse. It was dangerous, dark, dirty, chaotic, but also incredibly creative, full of young artists trying to find a way to make a living. For the man who would eventually become America's most celebrated and successful living composer, trying to find a way to make a living meant driving a yellow taxicab through the 5 boroughs at night.
I was doing the kind of day labor that was very hard on my hands. I worked for a very good friend of mine who was Richard Serra, but that was very heavy work, and we were working with lead and hot lead. I had learned about that from working with a couple of guys who had a plumbing outfit. But the trouble with this kind of work is the day of swinging wrenches around and then going home and playing the piano was hard. And finally, I ended up with taxi driving. That was the last of the day jobs, but because it was the easiest on my hands. I got to know the city very well. Within 2 or 3 weeks, I could find my way around the city. We have 5 boroughs here, which you could be in Queens or the Bronx or Brooklyn, Manhattan, Staten Island, but wherever I was, I could find my way. I enjoyed being in the city. Apart from the moments of terror, the city is a fantastic slice of life in any way you look at it. Whether you're up in the Bronx or in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn or you're up in Harlem, there are times you're driving around New York and you don't know what city you're in. There are bonfires on the corners that, with people staying warm in the winter like that. And you say, well, where the heck am I? I could be anywhere. You go from being way up there in the Bronx, half an hour later you're down in Midtown taking a lady to Lincoln Center to go see an opera. However, it was terrifying in other ways. It was very dangerous in those days. New York became dangerous when the cult of drugs arrived. Drugs brought with it all kinds of criminality and violence. It was a very violent place and difficult place to be in. When I was a student in New York, that would have been 10 years before, there was very little drugs in New York, and you could sleep in Central Park at night. And now the park is closed at night. I didn't play in a concert hall till '74. I wasn't allowed to play in concert halls. I was playing amplified music, and people just thought, they were afraid that the paint would peel off the walls when I turned up the volume. Of course, that never happened. It wasn't even that loud.
My name's John Gibson. I'm a composer and performer and a founding member of the Philip Glass Ensemble. We first started playing for art people in museums, galleries, and our initial fans were artists. It took a while for the music world to catch up because I guess it was so different or something that they thought it was too naive or I don't know what.
First place I played was in a place called the Cinematheque, which was named after, of course, the Cinematheques in New York. Jonas Mekas was a filmmaker, and he started this place basically for underground and offbeat films. And I met him at a party, and he said, what do you do? I said, I'm a composer. I knew who he was, and I said, could I do a concert in your place? He said, yes. He didn't have any idea who I was. And he said, when would you like to do your concert? And I said, well, what about May? And he said, great.
The Cinematheque was Philip's coming out concert. There was strung out for violin, solo violin. One called A Piece in the Shape of a Square for two flutes that Philip and I performed. These were kind of the solo pieces and duet pieces. Philip was working with Richard Serra, the sculptor, as an assistant, and this is the only concert where he built these sculptural music stand pieces for the music.
I showed up with a bunch of painters who helped me load in the equipment. We did pieces that were built around the idea of shapes.
Piece in the shape of a square was a square that had music attached to the inside of it and the outside of it, so that there was an inside performer and an outside performer. We'd start in the same place and then work our way around in opposite directions till we get back to the same place again.
In between these performances, Philip Glass was beginning to drive a taxi through New York.
I would show up around 3 o'clock to get a car, hopefully get out by 4. I wanted to be in by 1 or 2 because the bars closed at 3. That's not a good time to be driving. People get in the car and then they don't know where they're going, and then they forget they're in the car, and they don't know whether they paid you. So best to get back to the garage before 2 if you can. You take your hack license, and it was stacked with the other licenses by the order that you came in, supposedly, but we always suspected that they shuffled them because we would see someone who came in after us going out before us. But I always got out. I come home, so from 1 to 6 I would work on music. In those days I was writing Einstein on the Beach, so I was writing music till about 6 in the morning. And then my kids, was getting time for them to go to school. I'd take them to school. Then I would go to sleep. And I would sleep till around 3 and head over to the garage. And I only had to do that 3 or 4 nights. 4 nights a week would be a lot because I could do it on 3 nights a week. It depended on whether I needed the cash. The nice thing about that job is you had cash at the end of the day.
By the time Philip Glass got here to New York, he was stepping into something that was a part of the artistic ferment of the city. You had a city that was on the downturn, and people could get places to live quite cheaply, and so much of Lower Manhattan became a haven for artists of all kinds. And they were friends, they were colleagues, they created work together.
This is Joan LaBarbera. I was a member of the Philip Glass Ensemble from 1974 to 76. I believe I was the first singer to work in the ensemble. I was doing work in the early 70s with Steve Reich, and it was at a gallery in Soho. Someone pointed out Philip Glass to me, and I went over and introduced myself to him. I said, I'm a singer and a composer. Have you ever thought of using voice in your ensemble? He said, well, we're doing a concert over on Bleecker and Bowery this weekend. Why don't you come over and listen?
We rehearsed once a week, and then on Sunday afternoons we did a concert. There weren't a lot of people living in Soho in those days. That was originally a neighborhood for people to make clothing. A lot of manufacturing was done then. Little by little, artists began moving in.
As I was walking across Bleecker Street, I recall thinking that things were getting darker and murkier and dirtier. And when I finally got to the building, walked up what I remember to be about 10 flights of stairs, past a lot of barking guard dogs, wire mesh cages over some of the doors with lots of locks on them. And when I got up to the floor where Philip's concert was taking place, everybody was sitting around on the floor, around the circle of musicians.
My loft was about 75 by 50 feet, so that was a good sized place. And I had rugs on the floor, and by some accident of fate, I found theater seats that were uprooted and left on the street, and I put them around the side of the walls. So it was really like a little concert hall.
I listened, and after the concert, I went up to Philip and said, yeah, I really like it. And he said, great, well, our trumpet player just left the group, so why don't you come in and sing the trumpet part?
Philip's early period, it was very uncompromising music. It was tough, and it was not taking any prisoners. Laurie Anderson calls her company difficult music. You could call it difficult music.
I think what I found most attractive was the energy, this relentless driving rhythm that formed the underpinning of the work. There was a kind of raucousness and roughness about it, too. The sounds of the Farfisa organ are quite rough, and the saxophones give that kind of a funky quality to it. New York in the 70s was gritty. You really made a commitment when you moved to New York. It was noisy, it was dirty. That was sort of the rhythm of the city. You learned to walk down certain streets and not other streets. And if you saw a group of characters congregating on one side of the street, you'd move to the other side of the street and walk a little bit faster. The choices of instruments that Philip made, I believe, were really to reflect that kind of grittiness.
This is New York, the exciting, dangerous, sophisticated city that Americans call the Big Apple. But tonight, New York is a city in crisis, a city that's going broke.
In this, the wealthiest country in the world, we talk about the fiscal capital of the country, the communications capital of the country, going into bankruptcy and going down the drain. What the hell are we talking about?
The violence is increasing, and in the city where there are 4 murders a day, they're now thinking of the unthinkable, laying off policemen. New York just can't afford them anymore.
Driving a cab through the city was a dangerous proposition.
Almost every month, every other month, some driver was being killed. About 8 or 10 guys would be killed a year, and that's a lot. They're mostly men who were driving. I picked up a young woman. I was on First Avenue and Houston Street. That's a good, easy shot up to Harlem from there to what we called Spanish Harlem. That would be straight up First Avenue. You end up on 115th Street, a very different part of town. And I was worried about the young woman. When I asked her if she knew where she was going, she said yes, she was okay. And I had my doors locked, fortunately. I had stopped for a coffee earlier. I got in the car and locked the doors, but the back doors were open. She said she knew where she was going, and I took her to the address. And there was no car. If there had been a car double parked there, I wouldn't have stopped. Because if I got behind that car, another car could have gotten behind me and I would have been trapped. The street looked pretty clean. I stopped the car, and 4 guys jumped at the car, 1 at each door. And they pulled at the doors. The back doors flew open. The girl got out. The front doors held, and I floored it. Within 30 seconds, I was a couple blocks away. I went over to Fifth Avenue. I remember I picked up somebody going downtown and came home, back downtown. That was scary. I picked up people who just robbed a store on 43rd or 44th Street, and they were laughing and throwing money around, and I'd say anything, just trying to get them out of the cab as soon as I could. I knew they had guns. On the occasion, they were going into a part of Brooklyn that was very dangerous. For sure, they weren't going to pay, not even get paid for the job. If you can get out with your car, you're in good shape. That's the kind of situation you tried not to get caught into. At least once a night, there was a big adrenaline rush. That's why I didn't like it. It can make you sick, that kind of work.
Joan LaBarbera joined the ensemble in 1974, just as Philip Glass was completing work on Music in 12 Parts. Over a dozen slowly unfolding sections, this piece would establish Glass as one of New York's most original new composers.
Joan LaBarbera, voice.
As Philip was developing Music in 12 Parts, we would rehearse a couple of sections and then put on a concert.
Vicky Landry, flute.
I would take just stationery, really. I would make Xeroxes of the program, and I'd stick it on the walls around Soho, and premiere of Part 5 or premiere of Part 6. And on the days that there were premieres, when there was a new part, people would show up. I did a new part about every 3 months, so it took 3 years, and then I had all 12 parts.
The sound of music in 12 parts, it had that kind of broken record thing where it seems like the music isn't going anywhere, even as it's chugging along at a great pace. And for me, it has the rhythm of somebody who maybe is driving in a cab through the endless streets of New York, and they're all beginning to look the same until suddenly you turn a corner and you're on a boulevard or on Broadway, and suddenly there's a completely different texture to what you're seeing, or in this case, hearing.
When you listen to music in 12 parts, it doesn't ever let down. The energy keeps going, the rhythms keep driving along, so that when it stops, it's almost shocking. At a certain point, you really feel like it's going to go on forever. That intensity drives right through the piece. We did the first complete performance of Music in 12 Parts at Town Hall. I think it was a 6-hour concert. There was a dinner break, which was very nice. Of course, I couldn't eat much because I had a whole 3 more hours to go after that.
I rented Town Hall, 1,400 seats. That was a strange thing. I don't know why I had the nerve to do that, but $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. It's a fair amount of money, but still, for a big hall, it's not very much. I had some kind of idea that we were going to sell those tickets, and by God, we did. We sold it out. It was the largest audience I had ever seen, and I think the word had gotten around that I was writing this piece and that it had been going on for years, and I think anyone who would ever come came that night. And we had a sold-out concert. Amazing, huh?
Philip Glass's next project was the opera Einstein on the Beach. He collaborated with the experimental theater director Robert Wilson on a commission from the Avignon Festival. This 5-hour piece saw a coming together of New York's downtown theater, dance, and music scenes.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Robert Wilson was putting on his own productions, quite lengthy productions. Letter to Queen Victoria may have been maybe 12 hours long.
Bob had been doing these all-night pieces and performing them at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and a friend of mine took me out to see one. It began at 1 8 at night, went to 8 in the morning. I was also working in extended times, like 4 or 5 hour pieces. We began talking, we began meeting every Thursday.
Einstein on the Beach really did change what people thought the word opera could mean. There was no driving narrative, no obvious storyline to the piece. It was an abstract work of music, of theater, and of dance. Structured, these big 4 acts separated by these 5 connecting joints, the knee plays as they were known. No intermission. It was an immersive experience. You were in it for the long haul, and it really was kind of like being dropped into somebody's fever dream.
We thought we'd done a piece that was 4 hours long. We missed by about an hour. In fact, we didn't do it through without stopping until opening night. That was the first night we actually heard the piece from start to finish.
After the Avignon Festival, Philip Glass and Robert Wilson toured Europe with Einstein on the Beach before coming home for 2 performances at the New York Metropolitan Opera in November 1976.
The Met had decided that they wanted to use their dark nights, which happened to be Sunday nights. I guess it's a night that everyone could take off, and it is a chance for the company to clean up a little bit and get ready for the next week. We got off the plane, and a friend met us at the plane and said the first night had been sold out. We weren't even sure it was really going to happen at all. We barely got the equipment in time to do it. I was surprised when 1,400 people came to Town Hall in 74, and it was only 76, 2 years later. And now 4,000 people showed up. We did it twice at the Met, So that's maybe 8,000 people. But at least 20,000 people claim that they were there. You know, it was one of those kind of stories. My mother came, and she was totally surprised to see all those people there. She had been to see a concert of mine at Queen's College 7 years earlier, and there were only 6 people in the audience, including her. And so she came up 7 years later, and she sees 4,000 people. And I always wondered, what did she think of that? I never did ask her. I lost the chance to ask her, but I think she was pleased eventually. It took a year or so, but there was no institution behind us.
The audience applause at that time was stunning. For some reason, I have a recording of that applause. People were just completely stunned with this whole thing, and as they should have been.
Einstein on the Beach was the symbolic triumph for the downtown scene, which was perceived as being younger artists who weren't as trained and weren't as serious.
After the Einstein performance at the Met, there's this great story where he immediately goes back to driving a cab because they were completely in the red after all of this Einstein expense.
We innocently thought this opera sold out, that we had made some money. Actually, we had lost money. We were not an institution at all. We were just 2 guys who made an opera. And there was bills to pay, and I was back at work.
And this lady in the back of his cab once says, "You know, you have the same name as a very famous composer."
That famous story is kind of telling because there were a lot of musicians who were in that situation throughout the 1970s when there wasn't a lot of money to be had in the so-called downtown scene.
It wasn't particularly heroic. You have to remember that most artists in America, we don't get money from the government. If you go home and complain about it, your family will say, well, who asked you? In other words, who asked you to do it? Eventually, I was saved by an opera. The Netherlands Opera Company commissioned Satyagraha, and it was not very much money. It was $25,000, and that meant I didn't have to drive for about 6 months. 6 months passed, and some other thing came up, and I had a tour, and a year later, I renewed my taxi driver license because I wasn't sure. A year after that, I had had a day job in 2 years. By that time, I was 43. I kept the heck license. I've got it around here somewhere. And I gave the cigar box that you keep the money in and my watch and a clipboard to a pal who was a writer, by the way. And he told me that the watch stopped almost immediately, but the cigar box was where you kept the money. That lasted for a long time. We had really turned the corner in terms of the language of music. Not just myself, but a young generation. The language of music changed. And we had the great good fortune of being around when it was happening. These things happen in a collective way. And no one invented Impressionism, no one invented Cubism, no one invented action painting. It happened through the intercourse of an arts community, through the things that they bring in through the times, and through the politics, and through the ethics and morality of the time we live in. Of course, you look at Van Gogh, an astonishing painter, or Beckett, or anybody who somehow seemed to speak in a modern language that is both familiar and yet completely new. And you say, how did that happen? But it didn't happen. No one was hatched out of an egg. Nothing is more social or more intensely socially realized than culture.
Philip Glass, Taxi Driver, was produced by Paul Smith.